Well, I'm available to start at right tackle.
You can't see when I have clothes on.
All right. Well, there's not an even playing field. There's never been an even playing field. There never will be an even playing field.
What shampoo do you use on your hair?
You don't need to be Superman to play in this offense.
You're listening to The Red Zone.
Welcome, Badgers fans, to another episode of The Red Zone. I'm your host, Jason Galloway with the Wisconsin State Journal. We already had our first episode of The Red Zone earlier this week where we talked to John Veldhuis and Jake Ferguson, so make sure you go check that out on iTunes or Google Play or madison.com, wherever you find it easier to listen to. But today is our Mailbag podcast like we do every Friday. We're only one day away from the Michigan game now, and you guys have already sent in your questions. We got quite a bit of them this week, so I'll go ahead and get right into them. The first one's from Ryder Cup Captain at Badger OC1. He said, in the fourth quarter last week, Bucky was playing without 9 starters, 7 on D and 2 on O, and he said he's including Rand and Cephas. Are the Badgers just playing snakebit this year? That's definitely part of it. It's something that I think we've talked about all the injuries they've had, but maybe it does get overlooked a little bit. The fact that with Cephas and Rand, I think those get overlooked a little bit, especially Rand. He's been out for the season for such a long time now that I think a lot of people forget that he was going to take over as a starting defensive end this year, and a guy that has a lot of experience now and really could have done a lot of good for their defensive line. I mean, I feel like if you have a starting line of Isaiah Laudermilk, Garrett Rand, and Olive Sangapolo, it looks a lot better than maybe what they've shown so far this year. Maybe you don't have to rely on Caden Lyles, a guy who just switched to the position a few months ago, quite as much as they've had to as a starter these first couple months of the season. So I think for sure it definitely plays a big factor in going forward into this Michigan game. I think I think with the defensive injuries, I think that definitely plays a huge factor in their kind of chances of pulling off an upset here. And you look back at sort of the one loss that kind of derailed this season, the BYU game. Andrew Van Ginkel and Xander Neville didn't play any of that game really. Van Ginkel went out really early, and I think Neville played 2 snaps. And while Neville's out for the season now, I don't think they were quite as prepared as they would be now for them to be without him. He was back 100% healthy from his injury in fall camp, and to lose a guy right there on the second play of the game is a little bit tougher. I'm sure they hadn't practiced that jumbo package they brought out against Iowa the next week. So they were a little thin there. Luke Benshaw was already out for them at that point. And then with Van Ginkel, you don't expect that either. And he's a guy that, suddenly he's not in there for the rest of that game. And, I think Tyler Johnson even suffered an injury later in that game. I could be mistaken about that. So that's, I think that's a huge thing. And, if they have a little bit more health, throughout the season so far, let's say I think if they pull out that BYU game, if they just find a way to win that, even if it's closer than you anticipate, I think people view this team a lot differently right now. Although maybe it still wouldn't be the start from a performance level, not the start that maybe you would have expected from a team that was ranked 4th to start the season, but they would at least be undefeated and 5-0, heading into this Michigan game, and I think we'd maybe look at their chances a lot differently. So yeah, I think that definitely does play a lot of a factor. Next one is from Kyle Renke at Kyle_Renke88. Can the coaching staff open up the offense more? I'm convinced that they only have 4 plays: run, pass, and punt. We've talked about this on this Mailbag podcast quite a bit now. So I'm not going to get too much into it, but I think that obviously I don't think Wisconsin is going to go out there and change what they do. They've been successful with this offense for a pretty long time now. When the running game doesn't get going like you want it to, it doesn't look very pretty, and it can be kind of choppy. But I also think that if they went out there and aired it out from the start and passed the ball a bunch on first down and it didn't work either, then I think you'd be saying, why is Alex Hornibrook throwing the ball 40 times when they have 3 All-Americans on the offensive line and a Heisman Trophy candidate at running back? So I think when things go poorly, it's easy to, in hindsight, look back and say they should have played a little differently. I don't think Wisconsin's not like Wisconsin never passes on first down or second down. I mean, it's obviously they like to get their running game going, and they're going to try to establish that first. And But I don't think it's so much that I don't think they're so predictable that it's just run pass or everybody. I don't think teams always know what's coming. I think if you look at later in the game, if the running game has been going, they're able to set up a lot of play action and they're able to do a little bit more things in the second half. But when they start a game slow like they have at times, it maybe looks like they're a little bit too predictable. But again, whenever things don't go right, it's always easy to, in hindsight, to go back and look at it that way. But again, I got a lot more in depth on this in previous Mailbag podcasts, so you can go back and try to find that and listen to that if you want a little bit longer explanation. But I'll just leave it at that for now. Next one's from Lucas Capistrant at L Capistrant 1. Does the jumbo package stand a chance against Michigan's front seven, or are the Badgers going to have to get creative to manufacture rushing yards against this D? I think it could definitely help. I think that it's going to be much harder to maybe use brute force to get by this Michigan front than maybe it was against Iowa. So I think that I think we'll see the jumbo package some in this game. I think maybe more than against Nebraska. I don't think they necessarily needed it against Nebraska because that defense is pretty bad, and they were able to run the ball anyway. I do think you're going to see it more. I think having Luke Benshaw back at this point gives you a little bit of a boost too in that regard. Maybe you can use him a little bit more, and instead of sticking both Erdman and Bruss out there as blocking tight ends. So yeah, you definitely want to get. I definitely think they're going to throw that out there some early, and they're going to try to at least get some success in the running game. But I think at some point you probably do need to get a little bit more creative, like we talked about earlier, with a little bit more play action. To try to, you got to try to keep the Michigan's defense honest. You don't want them to put 8-9 guys in the box the whole time when you have the 7 offensive linemen out there. And we saw a couple times against Iowa where they did have that jumbo package in, and they went with play action and it really worked. The long pass to Ingold. I can't remember exactly what point in the game it was, maybe the second or third quarter of that Iowa game where they were in I think it was a short yardage play, and they did play action, and Ingold kind of slipped out for a big gain, and then the touchdown to Jake Ferguson in that game as well was out of the jumbo package on play action, and it really worked well. So I think you want to try your best if you're going to use that to have to have some success with it early, so that you can set up that other stuff. And if it doesn't work, then you got to try to find something else. But I definitely think they're going to try to use that this game. Let's see. Next one's from Ben Tannenbaum at MadDog7493. He asks, schematically, how does a defense that blitzes as much as Michigan's typically adjust for a fast running back like Taylor? I think you just have to. I think maybe you pick your spots a little bit more when you have a team that's that's a run first team, and a team that has a running back like Taylor. I think if you're Michigan, I think you want to try your best to not let that get going early. If you're able to get Wisconsin in a lot of obvious passing situations, third and long situations, that's kind of what you want to do. You want to get them. You want to focus on the run, the first and second down, when Wisconsin has a better chance of running the ball. And if you're able to win those downs and get them in those third and longs, or even second and long, when they might be in a passing situation, that's when you can kind of tee off and get upfield a little bit and try to go after the passer and blitz a little bit more. So I think for Michigan, I think they will blitz a lot in this game, but I think it's going to be a little bit more calculated perhaps, and maybe they are a little bit more pragmatic with it and kind of pick their spots a little bit more. Next one is Badger Fan at Divot516. He said, what are the 3 keys for a Badger win at Michigan? Don't list the obvious, that they need a pass rush. Who is the player on both sides of the ball that needs a great game? I think some of the keys, one of the keys for this game for Wisconsin is for their offensive line to win the battle, or at least come close to winning the battle against that Michigan front. I mean, we saw against Nebraska, they were able to just dominate that front, and it was real easy for Wisconsin to run the football and rack up 370 yards and score over 40 points. This is obviously going to be a lot more difficult of a game, and if they're not able to get that running game going, if Michigan's front really wins that battle and locks Taylor down and they're not able to get the run game going early, and Hornibrook is in a lot of third and long situations. It's going to make it very hard to move the ball consistently or at all, and makes it really hard to score points. So I think that's probably maybe one of the biggest keys for them is their offensive line has got to play well and try to at least win that battle or make it an even battle. Secondly, I think kind of the same way on the opposite side of the ball. I think for Wisconsin, their defensive line has to step up in this game. Isaiah Laudermilk was ruled out on Thursday. He's not going to be playing, so that's a really big loss for them. So to start two redshirt freshmen in this spot and at defensive end, and Caden Lyles and Matt Henningsen, who still don't have a lot of experience, I think it's going to be crucial for them to play well. If they don't, if they don't play well and Michigan's able to run the ball effectively, they're going to be able to set up a lot of their play action game. Obviously with the secondary banged up, they're going to need to give those guys as much help as they can. So I think they're going to have to do well against the run in this game, or Michigan's offense is going to have a lot of flexibility to do what they want. And so I think it's crucial that those defensive ends for Wisconsin play pretty well in this game. As far as the third one, obviously, like you said, I would say the pass rush is one of them, but since you eliminated that from my decision making, I guess I'll just say I think the other keys are just that they're questionable cornerbacks play in this game. Caesar Williams and Deron Harrell are both questionable. If they're both out and you have to stick a true freshman and Rashad Wildgoose in there to play a heavy snap count, I think that really that could really be a bad situation. I think Wildgoose played pretty well against Nebraska, but this is a little bit different animal against Michigan, and if he's got to be out there in a lot in this game, that could make it pretty difficult on the secondary, especially with Scott Nelson being out in the first half. So I guess if I had to pick three, I'd go with that. And as far as a player on both sides of the ball that needs a great game, I already talked about the defensive ends, so I guess I'd say defensively, just those two guys as a group, I guess, would say those guys need to play well. And then offensively, I think Hornibrook has to play well in this game. We talked about how Michigan's front may make it kind of difficult for that running game to be as consistent as you'd like it to be, and so I think it's at some point in this game, Hornibrook is going to have to step up and make some big throws on third down. So if he's on and he plays well and doesn't make mistakes, that gives them a lot better chance of pulling off the upset. Okay, Andy Chiodo at Great Wall of Chiodo asks, at what point do we see Van Lanen get most or all of the series at left tackle? He's been dominant in pass pro and better than Dietzen in run blocking. Yeah, I agree with you, Andy. I do think Van Lanen has been the better of the two left tackles, and they continue to give Dietzen the start at that position, and they keep rotating them. I don't know. I guess they just like Dietzen's veteran presence out there, I suppose. And I don't think Dietzen has been bad by any means. I think he's done pretty well having switched from guard to tackle, and I think he's done a pretty good job. Now he's still having a little bit of difficulty staying healthy. He did have to be. He was more limited earlier in the season. I think it was the New Mexico game that he really couldn't play much, and so I mean, we'll have to see how that plays out. I thought at this point, based on the way they've played, that Van Lanen would at least be getting most of those reps with maybe just Dietzen working here and there, but it seems like it's been pretty even still. So I mean, I don't know. I guess the coaching staff still likes what they've seen from Dietzen. So at this point, they're just going to continue to go with that. And maybe in a game like this against Michigan, if Van Lanen gets in there and is playing well, they go ahead and keep him in there. But I guess we'll just have to wait and see. Let's see. Bill _Woj at slow_creek. He asks, if you had to pick 2 or 3 true or redshirt freshmen that you think are going to be stars at some point, who would you pick? And you say other than Scott Nelson, so I can't pick Scott Nelson. I'm going to say for one of mine, I'm going to say Faion Hicks is an eventual star here. I think some people have gotten onto him a little bit early in the season here. I do think some of the, particularly against Iowa, some of the long passes that it looked like he gave up weren't actually his fault. There were a couple times, and I mentioned this I think I mentioned this in my film room story after that Iowa game, but there were sometimes he was in zone coverage and kind of trailing a play and then made up some ground and contested a ball, and it looked like he got beat, but really he was just trying to make up he was just in zone coverage, and it just happened to He just happened to be around the play when it happened. So I think he's played relatively well this year. He's obviously made some mistakes. He hasn't been perfect, and this entire secondary is still a work in progress, obviously. But he's a redshirt freshman. I think going back to for example, Sojourner Shelton's true freshman year, at least he had times where he struggled. Times where he was called for a lot of pass interference penalties. Where Faion Hicks has been called for a couple this year. So I think he's got a chance to progress like someone like that. A guy that's kind of thrown in here as a freshman and has a little bit of growing pains like maybe Sojourner Shelton did, but eventually turns into a star on this team and a guy that has a chance at the next level. A couple more guys. I'd say. I think Aaron Cruikshank has a real chance to be a star. Now, he actually still has not caught a pass this season. They have used him on some jet sweeps and things like that, and he's their main kickoff returner now. And I think once some of these receivers ahead of him graduate, he'll have an opportunity to really break out and be a star. Maybe a couple more years because they don't have any. All those receivers are sophomores or juniors right now. But I think at some point he's going to he's going to break out and have an opportunity to be a star here. I think even though he's small, he's got just a ton of talent right now. So let's see, that's two guys. I'm trying to think if there's anybody else off the top of my head that I really think is going to be good. I think Jack Sanborn, just picking one guy that maybe we haven't seen as much. Maybe Jack Sanborn's a guy that I think could be a really good player here, and he's played a little bit the last few games as a true freshman, but he hasn't really shown a whole lot yet. But I think just from watching him in fall camp, and I think he has a chance to be really impressive as well. Okay, Gary Stinson at GStinson9 asked a pretty simple question here. Do they have a chance with 3 question marks? I think Wisconsin does have a chance to win this game. Now, I said on my previous podcast earlier this week that this game does have possibly some blowout potential if the guys defensively for Wisconsin that are questionable don't play. And I think I picked Wisconsin to lose this game by 13 in the paper that's going to come out tomorrow. So I don't expect them to win the game. I am pretty pessimistic of their chances, but I do think they certainly could win. I don't think Michigan has been. Michigan has had some games where they've started pretty slow. The last week against Maryland, that game was close for a little while before they pulled away. Obviously, they had some trouble at Northwestern the week before where they could have lost that game. So it's not as if Michigan has been complete world beaters so far this year. I think they've been impressive. Their one loss is against a 7-point loss to a Notre Dame team that's ranked number 5 right now. And I think they're a really good team, and I think they're better than Wisconsin, but. Yeah, I definitely think that Wisconsin has a chance if they're able to I think if their offensive line is able to help them get the running game going a little bit, and if they're able to move the ball at least maybe not every drive and maybe not that consistently, but if they can just move the ball and get some points on the board, maybe if their cornerbacks play and maybe it's not as much of a they're not as thin in the secondary as maybe it looks like they could be right now, then who knows? We'll have to wait and see. Let's see. SMG at Sean Gary 4 asks, who is the most underrated team in the Big Ten? I'm actually, I think I'm going to go with Northwestern. They're a team that has started. They had a couple bad losses or at least a couple bad games in non-conference play. I think they lost to Duke at home, if I remember correctly, and had another really bad game. But this isn't really anything new for Northwestern. They've had some recent seasons where they started off seasons really badly, had a really puzzling loss early in the year, and they came back and just started playing well in conference play. And I think that's kind of happening again. They, like I mentioned earlier, they nearly were able to beat Michigan at home a couple weeks ago, and then they went. I think they were on the road and beat Michigan State last week, and I kind of saw that game coming, honestly, from Northwestern. I have not been impressed with Michigan State this year at all. I did not have them ranked in the top 25 at all before they lost to Northwestern, and I'm not surprised that the Wildcats were able to go in there and beat them. That's going to be a tough game for Wisconsin here in a couple weeks. We're only 2 weeks away from them going to Northwestern, and people are just kind of focusing on the Michigan game and the Penn State game as sort of the turning point games for them and the games they'll probably lose. But I also think at Northwestern is certainly no easy task either, and I think they're I think we're going to go back at the end of the year and see that Northwestern was a pretty decent team by the end of the season, and so I think that's a team that maybe after the Michigan State game, people are starting to take notice of them, but I think even before that, I kind of saw them as a team that could do something this year. Let's see. Ethan13 at Ethan_Gothel. He asks, if the secondary produces drop passes, interceptions, etc., do the Badgers have a chance of winning the game? So I guess we talked about their chances a little bit earlier, but I think from a secondary standpoint in particular, if the secondary plays well and the injuries don't hurt them as much, Scott Nelson not being in there doesn't hurt them as much, and they actually play a good game and don't give up big plays. I think that's one of the big things for this defense for Wisconsin is if they can just eliminate the big plays in the passing game, that definitely that helps you out so much. I mean, against Iowa they gave up a bunch of big passing plays, and obviously against Nebraska they did too, and that's kind of been their Achilles heel so far these last couple games, at least in conference play. And I just think that if their secondary does play well, it at least gives them a little bit of a chance. Because if their secondary is giving up those big passing plays again to this team, especially when it's going to be difficult for Wisconsin's offense to keep up on the scoreboard, and Michigan's also has a pretty good running game, I just think that's going to make it pretty hard for them to win. Let's see, Brian Kale. You've told me how to pronounce this before, and I completely forgot already. Brian Kale at Kale_Brian. He said, with Wisconsin's recent success under Paul Chryst, why is it we keep missing out on some of the bigger recruits, such as Casey picking Oregon the other day? Are the academic standards keeping us from going after more 4 or 5 star recruits? I hardly see us going after many of these high star recruits if they're not offensive linemen. I think Wisconsin does get some of those 4-star guys. They're starting to try to get more of those guys. They have. You mentioned, if they're offensive linemen, they go for them. They do have a guy in Logan Brown who's possibly one of the 10 best players in the entire country coming in the 2019 class. Now, he is an offensive lineman, like you mentioned, but that's obviously a legitimate 5-star guy coming in. And Graham Mertz, a high 4-star quarterback, is coming in the 19 class as well. And so they're starting to get more 4-stars. I think the recruiting has picked up a little bit since over these last couple of years, since they since they started having a little bit more success and kind of started pushing for a potential playoff spot. And I think it's still always going to be a little bit hard. Even though Wisconsin has had some recent success, I still think it's for guys that aren't, at least guys that aren't from Wisconsin or aren't from the Midwest, I think it's hard to convince them to come to Wisconsin over some of those brand name schools like Michigan or Ohio State or Alabama or Georgia, places like that just have the just have the history and the tradition of being successful over really their entire history, or at least for most of their big stretches of their entire history. And I think I just don't know if Wisconsin is viewed in the same category yet, even though they have had recent success. They've been better than Michigan the last few years, if you really want to look at it that way. But I still think that brand goes a long way with some of these kids, and I do think their recruiting has picked up a little bit. Obviously I mentioned some of the guys that they have bringing in, and they have they have a pretty good class they're putting together. So obviously you'd like to see them recruit more 4 and 5 stars. I think maybe the next step would be if they are able to make the playoffs at some point. That could be a game changer. They have performed well, but they still haven't been quite on that biggest stage yet. Take Clemson, for example. They always a good program, but I think once they made the playoffs a couple times and they did win a national championship, it really just completely changed things for them. Now they're considered a real power, a national power. So Wisconsin, I think the next step is to try to make a playoff appearance and be on that big stage. Maybe that helps a little bit more, but I do think they're heading in the right direction as far as recruiting goes. Let's see. Sean at Lazarus21, he asks, what are your predictions on playing time for all 3 guys with the questionable designation? Without them, it could get ugly. Yeah, so the 3 questionables, I mentioned the 2 cornerbacks, Teron Harrell and Caesar Williams, are both questionable. And then Andrew Van Ginkel is also listed as questionable. Now, Van Ginkel is obviously going to play. He's a guy that's Amazingly, Van Ginkel has not missed a game this season. He played a few plays against BYU before getting hurt, and then was able to play 5 snaps the next week against Iowa. Played a little bit more against Nebraska, and I think his workload is probably going to continue to increase little by little as he gets over this ankle injury that he has. And it's hard to say exactly how much he's going to play in this game. I think he's going to try to do as much as he can. I think the next step for him is actually starting the game. He did not start against Iowa or BYU. I'm sorry, against Iowa or Nebraska. And I think that maybe this is the game that he's able to do that and play a little bit more. But we don't get to watch practice or anything, so we don't know exactly how much he's done. We know he's done some work like he has the last few weeks as well. But I think you'll see him increase a little bit for Nebraska. We'll wait and see if he starts. The 2 cornerbacks, it's kind of impossible to say. They've been pretty tight-lipped on kind of what the status of those guys are. I know they had done some work in practice, both Williams and Harrell, and Jim Leonard said on Wednesday that those guys could be more game time decisions. So I don't think that we are going to find out until pretty soon before the game if they're going or not. But I think with those guys, I think with Deron Harrell, it's going to be he either doesn't play at all or he plays a full load of snaps. It's a head injury for him, so he's either going to clear the concussion protocol or he's not. I think when you're in that situation, it's not like they're going to put him in for a partial amount of snaps. So it's either he's going to go or he's not going to go. With Caesar Williams, we'll just have to wait and see. I don't really have a good gauge on him. The last one here from Ryder Cup captain at Badger OC1. He asks, isn't it time for the athletic department to open up 50% of a student section for ticket sales to the general public? The lack of support by students of football games is an embarrassment to this university. Good programs equal good student attendance. No excuse. I understand your frustration, but I think 50% is a little bit of an overreaction. I do think there are some games where even in the middle of the game when the student section gets quote unquote full, there is a little bit of space still there for that isn't taken. And so if I wouldn't be opposed to, or I don't think many people would be opposed if they took maybe 10% of it away. Now, obviously the students would probably not be happy with that, but I do think at some point, if it doesn't fill up, then maybe you make a change like that. I think 50% is way too much. I mean, I think obviously there are a lot of games where it is only 50% full at the start of the game, but generally it gets just about all the way full once the game starts. And I know a lot of students will complain about the way they're let into the game. How they're let in single file and it takes forever to get through, and that's a big reason why it's not full at the start of the game. And that's definitely a valid point. You could also get there a little earlier if you're the students as well, if that's an issue. But again, it's obviously I think they do need to change how they let these guys in. They need to find probably a better way to figure out a better way to do that. And I know a lot of students have complained about that. And then there's been a lot of complaints too about sort of the non-students that see the student section not that full, and they say what's going on. But I don't know exactly what the solution is. They've rebranded the student section area red, which we've talked about before. Don't know how much effect that has had so far. But I seem to get student section questions a lot on this mailbag as well, and I'm not sure exactly what the solution is. I definitely do not think they should take 50% away from the students. I think that's a real exaggeration, but I do think maybe there's a little bit of room there that students need to kind of make up for. And even some of the big games they haven't been in their season time. And the BYU game, like I mentioned before, there's a lot of people that left in the fourth quarter when that game was still in doubt, which you have to question. Why would you leave that game when BYU's up 7 in the third quarter for much of the third quarter? So I don't know. Well, obviously it's a much talked about issue that we've hit on a lot, and I'm not really sure exactly what the solution is, but we'll have to see. There's not many home games either that excite you the rest of the way. So I'm not sure that against Illinois or Rutgers that it's going to be too good, but maybe at some point in the offseason they can continue to make some changes to try to make that better for next season. All right, that's going to do it for the Mailbag podcast. Thank you for all your questions. If you didn't get your question in time for this, we are going to do a live chat late Saturday night after Wisconsin's game at Michigan. Follow me on Twitter at Jason_Galloway to get an update on when we're going to start that. It'll be pretty late. We're going to get our work done for the paper first and get that in, and maybe even get back to the hotel before we do that. So just if you're a night owl and you want to stay up for that, just follow me on Twitter for when I'm going to start that. And of course, keep visiting madison.com for all your Badgers football news. Thanks for listening.